Hi, welcome to the Awakening Educator. I'm Susan Andrian.
And I'm Megan Sweet.
And we are so excited today to have our friend and colleague, Sara Stone, with us. And so we're going to do something a little different. We're going to let Sara introduce herself today and tell us a little bit about her experience and who she is. So I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sara Stone. I am currently Chief Academic Officer for Alameda Unified School District. I've worked in education since 1995. I have been everything from a 5th grade teacher, 7th grade teacher, data coach, and principal supervisor, and now Chief Academic Officer. And I've worked in all sorts of different kinds of systems, mainly urban systems.
So glad that you're here, Sara.
Yeah.
And Sara's kicking off our series on administrators. So today we hope to talk with Sara about all that range of experiences and how that informs the way that she shows up in her role now. And then we'll be speaking with 2 other school administrators in the upcoming 2 episodes. So we're really excited. One urban principal here and one on the East Coast.
Yeah.
So we're really excited to have both of them join us too.
Yeah, and really one of the reasons we were really wanted to do this series and feel like it's so important is I think often, and at least in my experience, when we think about the role of the administrators and the stress level in which they're on and their experience, and it's really difficult to know what administrators need and what's going to be supportive, and I think everyone sort of looks to them, both from the district level looks to them to hold things together, and then from the parent and teacher level looks to them, and they often feel very isolated. So hopefully give a window into that experience of what it means to be a school administrator.
Yeah, so maybe we can just start on what does a district, your academic, say your title one more time.
Chief Academic Officer.
Chief Academic Officer. Oh my God, I can't believe I didn't remember that. Can you tell us a little bit about what a Chief Academic Officer does? What's kind of a typical day in the life?
Well, I can start by saying no day is typical in the life of a Chief Academic Officer, but ultimately my role is to support our schools to have instructional programs that create successful outcomes for our kids. So I support the teaching and learning department. I supervise principals. I work closely with the superintendent on strategic planning and organizing around just basically what our vision is for what good instruction looks like in a classroom.
That's great. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And sort of thinking about that, and given that there is no typical day, what are some of the things that maybe folks don't realize are the needs or what an administrator might be going through that you might be showing up for, even as your role as an administrator, in your current role or in your previous role?
Well, I would say similar to Chief Academic Officer not having a typical day, I would say a school administrator, there is no typical day. You're consistently dealing with everything from working, to create your own plan and system in your school, to working with parents who are either really excited and wanting to support it or not feeling it and have some concerns. You're in the classroom, looking at instruction and supporting teachers to do better with that, to meet the needs of kids. And there are days where you're literally like cleaning up the cafeteria. You're, going into the bathrooms and stocking toilet paper. So the day, and you're supervising kids on the yard. So your day is just everywhere. It's all over the place. You have to be able to really be a strategic thinker and planner, and also really build those relationships that support the school and running well.
Yeah, I appreciate you naming that, because I think that's one of the things that, and I'm a former administrator too, and I have an administrative role now, that I even see my current staff not seeing or appreciating. It definitely happened when I was at a school site working with, like as a school administrator working with teachers, is there's a sense that we're sitting around in our offices chilling, or that we have an extremely like open schedule or tons of time. And so there's often this weird misunderstanding between people who are like in the field or feel like they're on the ground doing the work
Yeah.
and the people that are administrating on the other side. And I know I thought that before I became an administrator. And I'm seeing it now again, like I said, with my staff, where there's a sense that I have just an inordinate amount of time that I'm available to answer any question. And when I put boundaries on that, there's frustration. And it's a unique thing being an administrator at schools or with so many different people, I think, because you can't count on what your day is going to be like. So I'm hearing you say that as a district administrator, which I also know and have been a district administrator for a long time too, with you, that you think you have your day or your plan or you know what you're going to do, and then something shows up and then the whole plan gets blown. So I think it's just an interesting thing for us to pull out a little bit. And what are some of the skills then that you use to navigate that like I have a plan, and now it's been blown up and I have deliverables, and like, so how do you navigate that for yourself? And then maybe after you say that for yourself, how do you support in your past roles, principals doing that same thing?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a strategy, a very specific strategy around urgent and, you know, important. And so just looking at a situation in the moment and saying, okay, if this is urgent and important, I have to do it right now. If it's urgent, but not that important, then we'll have to figure out where that fits into the day. And then if it's not urgent or important, that goes on my to-do list for another day. And actually, as a principal supervisor, this is one of the first things I sit with principals to kind of look at their own schedule. And I do think you have to have your dream schedule mapped out for the day or for the week. When do you have those conversations with your teachers? When do you have time for parents to come in? When do you have just work time, which I think a lot of principals who burn themselves out, they don't actually schedule their work time into their day. And then how do you hold classroom visits sacred throughout the day? So what is the most important time to be in the classrooms? When do you do it? How do you do it? I actually try to encourage principals to think of that as the urgent and important. So those classroom visits are like the scheduled thing that that thing happened, but unless there's blood or fire, you're in the classroom. And then I think trying to hold to that schedule, but then when those things come up, looking at, okay, is this something I really have to do right now? Then I'll do it.
It's scary. I'm as you're talking and just even in my own role as doing crisis response and working with principals and sort of feeling that and thinking about the urgent and important and long-term and schools that are stuck in reactive crisis mode, and that all of those things really do feel like urgent and important. But if you keep just attending to these, you can't shift the culture to then get to a more responsive. So what are some of the ways that you have been able to help principals start to address when it truly is crisis reaction mode? Like, how do you help a system shift?
Wow,
that's a great question.
That's a great
that's
question.
$1 million question.
Sorry. How do you solve all the problems?
Easy. I mean, I think that's really actually at the core, the thing that principals struggle with the most, and that administrators, I mean, I'm struggling with it as a chief academic officer. It's like these things happen that you absolutely have to pay attention to because they're really, really urgent and important and potentially really can create bigger problems if you don't address them. And you also have to be consistently thinking about what are the systems that you're putting in place. Why did that thing happen that way? And how can I plan for something different so that kind of thing doesn't continue to happen? So what I like to do in those situations is obviously you have to address, but then you have to be able to stop afterwards, reflect, and think about where was the breakdown? Was it a systems issue? Was it a relationships issue? Was it both? And then what do I need to do to put something in place? Or how do I have my team work with me to put something in place so that kind of thing doesn't consistently continue to happen?
Yeah, what you're talking about is a reflective element, right? So how do you build in a practice of being reflective and analyzing what happened so that you can be proactive moving forward, which, you know, there are some leaders that are excellent at that, and they spend a lot of time in that space. There are some leaders that reflect themselves to death, and then they can't get out of that,
Yeah,
right? There's a lot of that.
Yeah.
And there's some that never can get into that reflective space.
Yeah.
They just constantly live in reaction mode, and
right.
and you're constantly dealing with them, helping them do that. And I know for you, you've had to supervise like cores of principals that go across that range
Yeah.
all the time. So I'm just wondering, and I'm sure it's true for you in your current role as well. So how do you do that? How do you start to meet the principals at their places where they're at? And again, still have the balance that you need, but like, how do you, it's kind of like the problem that teachers have, right? Like you have a range of kids in your classroom that have all these different skills and you have to figure it out. That actually never goes away. I have those same challenges in my team as well. So I'm just wondering how you navigate that.
Well, I think part of that is looking at the role of supporting principals, and that when you are a principal supervisor, or when you're working with principals, you have to be able to have a relationship where you can have honest conversations. And I look at the role, even though I'm an evaluator, I'm also a coach, and so I need to be able to first understand the principal, understand their context, understand who they are, how they come to the work. So again, it's the building the relationship and really understanding that, and then building time into my time with them to do that reflection. So when I was a principal, reflecting sometimes was a little painful. I mean, even as a chief academic officer, it's painful because you're like, oh, I messed that up, or oh, ouch, I could have done that better. So sometimes you want to shy away from the reflective time because it's just too hard. But if you have somebody who is going to consistently show up and support you with that, it's easier. And so I think that, principals don't get the coaching consistently built into their schedule that they really truly need. So the way I like to approach my role is that, I'm an evaluator, but I'm a coach as well. And I'm coaching them, and I'm helping them to have that time to reflect. I'm helping them to have that time to think about what did I do well, and how can I build on that asset to continue to do well in other situations? Like, what areas am I really doing a great job with? And I think often principals, educators in general, like to beat themselves up because it is so hard, and it's
so high stakes.
It's so high stakes, and none of us really know how to do it the way it needs to be done yet.
Right.
But we're building it, we're working on it. So that reflective time is really important. So for me, when I'm with principals, one of the first things I do is I help them. First of all, I'm just like, okay, we're good. Like, let's just take a breath. This is probably the first time this week you've been able to just sit and take a breath. Let's do that. And then let's talk about all the great things that happened this week. Start there. And then what are some things that are on top for you that you feel like you need support with? And then, through my conversation, it's reflective. So
I want to call a few things out that you talk about there, and because I think it's really important, and it often gets bypassed. So the first one is you're building trust, and I think that's the most crucial thing we can do as leaders in our classrooms too. But as leaders, like, you need that trust so that you can have folks go with you. You need trust with the parents. You need trust across the board. So the fact that you intentionally build that time, I just think is a really important element for us to call out. The other thing that you talked about there, which again, I think I know because I know you, because I know is a hallmark of you, and it's not shared with everybody. Is you do take a coaching stance, you listen. And so you make it safe for people to be vulnerable. One of those things is to call out and to focus on the positive things first, and let them, force leaders to see the positive, because we also, as educators, we're good at beating ourselves up, and we're also good at not seeing what we're doing well. And even if we see it doing well, we're kind of trained not to talk about that. So to have that be called out and to be a place where you start to celebrate your successes is really important, because it gives you some energy to keep going, and then to give them some space to problem solve. So that trust and that communication is so important, and coaching, I think, is one of the most crucial things we can give to all educators. It's just a space for someone where you can just talk and share what's going on. So I really appreciate you do all those things, and I want to put pins on all of those.
As you were talking, and I also have had amazing opportunity to work with Sara and under her leadership with a large group of principals who are across really, really diverse settings and skill level. And as you were talking, I kept thinking about the above the green line and below the green line that you always bring to the work that I've seen you do. And that the professional learning spaces, right? The opportunity for really true professional learning spaces. And this feels similar to like a classroom or teachers, and that if we're taking administrators off of campus, that what you provide for them and what you do at that time is so critical. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about like your theory of action around that and how you create those spaces, because there's always this resentment and tension around being removed from their sites and then what you do at that time, and that but you can't have reflection unless you actually get off the site, because you're cleaning the bathroom and putting toilet paper in there or whatever else is going on.
Knocking on your door.
So curious about your theory of action around that and how you make that happen and what you do at that time.
Well, I think for me that, thanks. For me, anytime you take a principal off-site, you need to make sure that that time is well spent for them. And I think for adults to feel like a time is well spent, they need to be collaborators in that time. So there has to be something that is connected to them and their own learning and their own growth. So for me, it goes back to first you have to create a safe and trusting environment. And so I like to be able to use any time I have with principals or anyone really in professional development is having a bit of a time for a release of emotion and to just be sort of centered in yourself as a human, and to remember your why, like why are we doing this work? And then I think that whatever professional learning you're doing, it has to be co-constructed. It has to be connected to your own context, your own growth areas, yourself. So it's hard to do that when you're in like a high stakes environment. And at the bottom line is we need, our test scores to increase, and we need to see, a reduction in suspensions. And so I try to kind of weave the kind of more technical pieces together with the more relational pieces, so that going back to the above and below the green line, Margaret Wheatley's amazing 6-circle model.
So actually explain a little bit what that is?
So Margaret Wheatley, who's one of my all-time favorite people in the world, who hopefully one day I'll get to meet, she has this 6-circle model where there's this green line, and above the green line is all the sort of technical pieces of being a leader, and the below the green line is the more relational pieces of being a leader. And so whenever I'm putting together professional learning, I want to make sure that I'm paying attention to both sides, and making sure that if we're talking about anything that's technical, we're thinking about, well, what is the information or the relationship building that needs to go behind that so that the technical piece can be successful. And so I like to organize a professional learning day that way, where you're actually starting with the relational and then you're building the technical skills. So that's,
I love that intentionality, which I don't know if people always start with that first. Like, so even the idea that your starting point is to start with a balanced day and balanced PT. I can't think of many people who go about it that way. And I think it's just so important, and it shows up in how the principals love working with you.
Absolutely.
But actually, I have a question for you, Susan, which I think might be that Sara might be able to answer, but I'm wondering, so Susan and I, everybody probably knows it, although we haven't talked about it in a while, but I represent more the traditional side of education. So structure, roles, teacher, administrator. And in a lot of ways that I'm an insider or have much more insider knowledge or experience. And Susan does the mental health supports and addresses students in trauma. And I think often, I'm guessing, your side of the house often feels a little bit more like outsiders or not as able to access or integrate into the school day. I might be wrong about that, but like that marriage isn't there. And so I'm just wondering how that shows up for you when you work with administrators, if Sara has any insights about that.
So definitely, I think that the way that the schools and the systems are structured fosters this sort of separation of
Right.
the social, emotional, and mental health needs of everybody in the building,
Right.
kids, adults, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, all of my career, I've been in school settings and sort of worked through and focused a lot more on below the green line stuff, the relational stuff and the system stuff, and have gained knowledge through osmosis of being in the school system for 20 years, some more of the technical, even though I'm not an instructor and I'm not an administrator, I have some knowledge through just being around enough.
Right.
So I think under Sara's leadership, so I have different leaders,
Right.
and the leadership and the value that that leader holds on the importance of the below the green line stuff trickles down, right?
Okay.
And so working under Sara's leadership and being really included in professional learning and fostered relationships with administrators around the needs that are showing up in the schools, I felt extremely integrated into
Right.
the foundational needs and really recognized that instruction can't happen without safety and trust, and that growth in adults can't change unless they feel able to be vulnerable. So that was sort of woven in, and that's also how I really see it, right? I don't see the work as separate. So in that sense, because of Sara's leadership, I was able to be integrated. And I feel like I've built relationships with administrators that now I hope, and I think many of them, and we're going to ask a couple of them because we're going to be talking to some that I've worked with around their perception of my support and how that shows up as someone who's an ally to them, can help them think through some of those challenges of moving from reactive to responsive. So
yeah.
But Sara's leadership definitely fostered that a lot for me.
Well, I think what you're talking about, and I'm wondering if Sara can, thank you for that, Susan, because I mean, I think it's something that we've talked about and we see it, right?
Yeah,
but I think
absolutely.
Even one thing that you said that I want to pull out is that the intentionality of like the principal leader of a central office to integrate in all those below the green line things makes a difference.
Absolutely.
And what strikes me is it's the challenge of the day, at least in the world that I live in, so the mindfulness SEL world. Which is people want to have those things, but they don't know how to fit it into the day. And so they keep treating it as this extra, this add-on, this something that's separate or hard. And I just keep feeling like, no, it's how you do it. Like
it's how you do it, right?
Integrated.
It has to be how you
separate.
do it.
It's not,
it can't be separate.
No, it has to be integrated. Right. So
I always say people are not separate. Like your emotions and your head heart is constantly connected.
Yes.
So to say, well, we do this at this part of the day and then it goes away. It's like what we need to do for kids, right?
Absolutely.
And when I think of like multi-tiered systems of support and how we integrate the social emotional learning and mental health support into the instructional, they're not separated. They have to be together. And adults need that just as much, if not more, than kids. So,
and it doesn't mean there aren't times, right? There are times that the mental health needs of a particular person, child or adult, don't rise to a space where they do need to be pulled out and get some separate sort of extra focus on it. And that's true for instruction too.
That's the tiers, right?
It's just the tiers. So but the foundational piece the tier one has to incorporate all of these pieces: good instruction, good social emotional learning, good like relationship building and community building, and all of those things need to be.
Well, I just go back to brain research, which is, if your amygdala is hijacked, you're not learning anything, you're not doing anything well. So at the core, we have to make sure that the amygdala is not being chased by a lion.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because I think we often actually just, again, in this reactive way that we often can be as administrators or as school folks, we jump right to the top tier. And folks, for those of you who don't know what multi-tiered systems of support, it means that you have levels of support for students on both the social, emotional, mental well-being side, as well as the academic side. So there's level 1 should be for everyone. Level 2 should be for people who need a little bit more support, and level 3 should be for people that are needing a little bit more acute care and support academically, or any of the other ways that we support students and families in schools. Now I lost my train of thought. What were we talking about?
I'm not sure, but but Sarah was mentioning the amygdala stuff, and I was thinking about, because you also, one of the things I really appreciate about your leadership is the inclusion of some really important cutting edge research and data, understanding this research and data, and then helping in a systemic way leadership apply this learning to their specific environment. And you did this with the work of Sara Hammond and the culturally responsive teaching in the brain, and so I heard a little bit of that in what you were just saying, and I'm wondering how do you conceptualize that work that you're doing and bringing that so as it works its way down to the children and families.
You're like on fire with your questions.
I
mean, I have a lot of internal knowledge about what Sara does. But
I do too. You're like killing it.
Yeah,
I just want to name that.
Yeah, well, I for me, I'm a very, very much call myself an equity focused leader. And so we're not doing what we need to do for our kids, for all kids. We're just not creating the conditions for success for all of our kids. And so as somebody who is passionate about that, I do believe that, I love Sara Hammond's work around culturally responsive teaching in the brain. I'm probably her biggest fan. And the main reason for that is because she brings brain research into what should happen in the classroom. And I think it is the best possible way to show how the brain actually responds to multi-tiered systems of support. It's like, it takes it from being just sort of this like, oh, that's a nice structure and framework we should probably use, to like, actually that's how the brain learns. And if you don't do it this way, the brain won't learn. The brain won't create the whatever, the cortex, what is it? The myelin around the myelin and the fat and all of that. Like
the neuroconnections, the synapses won't connect.
So if you don't do that, then no one is going to learn. And then when you're thinking about kids who are culturally and linguistically diverse, and you're thinking about how do you create a tier 1 experience for kids who are coming with different languages and coming from different cultures, some cultures being very individualistic and some cultures being more collectivist. Like, you have to create a system in your classroom that really supports all of the kids at a tier 1 level, so that you're not actually having as many kids in tier 2 and tier 3 supports. And I think of that for our adults too. I don't think that there's a difference between the culturally responsive teaching and the brain works for students and it works for adults. So how are you creating a support for everyone that really meets their particular needs, so that everyone can be successful?
I wonder if you could take that through like a specific example. So I think everything that you said is really helpful, but like maybe even just imagining one initiative that you've led that way, or one thing, so that we can start to see how that lines up. That might be a challenging question. So either that way, like in a school, like what would it look like for a multi-tiered system of support there? Because I think this is where we get thrown off the most, is people can conceive of it, but then they don't, like when they sit down to actually do it, that's when it's suddenly a challenge and people start to break things apart again and they don't hold it together. So I'm just wondering if you even have an example of something you've coached your principals through, or even at the district level, where you start to imagine those tiers and what that looks like through just one initiative or one thing.
Or one inquiry.
One inquiry, yeah.
Well, it's funny because what popped into my head was not me as a principal supervisor, but me as a principal, and starting to implement a more balanced approach to literacy in the classroom. So my last principal position, it was I took over at a time where we still weren't doing balanced literacy in the classroom, and we were using, a basal reader. And when I got there, the teachers were like, we need to do something different. This isn't working. And so we collaboratively started to come to terms with what would be better for kids in the classroom at a tier 1 level, and what kind of program would we want to put in place where kids are getting instruction at their level, but also you know, moving ahead and being able to have success at their grade level. So collaboratively as adults, we came together and figured it out. And it was messy because everyone had different ideas. And at the time there was a lot of different, you know, ideas about what would be best for kids.
Right.
So the one thing that we realized is no matter how we did it, we did have to create a classroom environment where kids could access and could be safe, and where teachers actually could pull small groups, because ultimately if you're doing everything one size fits all for your entire classroom at all times, it's not going to be effective.
Right.
So I think the way that we approached it, actually we used a program called Responsive Classroom, which I think is a program that allows teachers to be able to set up the conditions in the classroom so that kids know what to expect. It's very safe, it's very clear, like from the technical level to the emotional level. So like the technical is, how do I go and get pens to use when I'm doing my writing? What's the procedure? What's the process? To how are we setting up the conditions in the morning for all kids to feel seen, heard, and cared for? And using that in conjunction with creating a more balanced approach to literacy in the classroom, teachers were able to create more small group instruction experiences. And it was challenging because teachers hadn't been used to that, and they were terrified. They were really terrified to give up the control of the classroom. But I would say, and again, because we approached it as adults collaboratively together, it wasn't top down. It was, let's figure this out together. Let's bring different ideas in that we want to try, and let's see how it goes. And let's take an inquiry stance. Let's see, did this work? Did it not work? What are we going to do different? So I feel like our school really was at the cutting edge of when the whole district decided to go balanced literacy. We actually had systems in place, and I didn't get that pushback from teachers that a lot of principals got around, I can't do small group. That's not going to work. I have 30 kids. That's not. I didn't have that because they helped figure it out. We did it together.
Yes, you were talking about, I think what's interesting, the way you shared that story too, also just points to your leadership and your leadership skills, which is you built consensus. You had everybody look at the problem together. So you didn't come in top down, which often happens in any field. Often in education it's there. You looked at the problems together, and you also took an inquiry stance, which I think is really hard for educators to do. Maybe for humans, but I know when you were saying that, I was like, right, I'm rewriting some curriculum with my team right now, and we're in the exact same soup, right? Everyone's like, well, we can't possibly do this, we can't do that, and everybody has different things that feel important, and we're winnowing down. And then there's just a lot of fear of of wanting to keep things permanent. And I'm like, we have to stay in the land of inquiry. We're not sure this is going to work, but we have to go for it. Like, we have to try it and let things roll out a little bit and possibly fail, possibly succeed, but have that inquiry stance so that you can go back and do it again. I also loved your talk about procedures, because it started to make me smile, because as a person who supervised teachers, eventually the procedures are what get you every time, at a school level, but at a classroom level too. Like, right. Because that's what makes things like independent time completely fall apart. I still remember watching a teacher in the classroom, and she had the kids, they were supposed to cut something out to do an activity, and the activity was the learning, but the cutting out was what completely threw the class into complete chaos. And I was just like, in my mind, I was like, why didn't you just cut things first? Like, they didn't need to cut it. Like, it was just a waste of time. And you didn't have any procedures for it. So scissors are flying around the room, and kids are crying, and the whole situation. So I think also like helping teachers understand what parts they need to plan for with that level of intentionality. They can take that then and do that over and over and over again. Like, oh, I need a procedure for when this thing happens, so that the kids can learn, and I can step away, because they can't step away because they never create those procedures. They can't step away and give kids control because they don't set up the conditions to make kids successful. And then all hell breaks loose.
It makes me think, one of the schools we visited on one of our PBIS tours across the country, they had a list for orientation for new teachers. It was like, here's the list of, it was like 60 things, right? And it was like, you need a procedure for all of these things here. And so here's some and they linked to examples where people could create their own, but as part of their orientation as a new teacher to the school, they were asked to complete these like huge lists of procedures, and they were all, everything from like, but there were also a list of ones you could use,
right?
And they were all little important ones. And I think even if it's just to get the teacher who's a new teacher who's so overwhelmed to think, oh yeah, I need a getting water procedure, right. I need a scissors procedure, I need a lining up procedure, I need a coming back in, like all of those little tasky things that make it possible, because
well, what I like about that too is it's not like, here is the procedure you're going to use, but here is the list that you're going to have to, as a good teacher, these are things that are going to happen in your classroom. Right. You think about it and you figure it out, and we're going to be okay with what you come up with, but you need to have something.
You need to have something,
yeah. Well, and I think that's what good teachers come up with, right? So I think you're right. Like you stumble across it, and I do. 60 was like, oh, that feels like a lot, but I agree with you. Like it's the things that I think if you I was a bad kid in school.
Yeah, me too.
There are no bad kids.
I was an actor. I was a
problematic child.
I was a child who spent time in the office. We'll say that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. I was a bad child.
I was the spirited child. We were the spirited. Yeah, we were the spirited children.
I'm the one that found out where the procedures needed to be. Right. So I am absolutely the person like, oh, Megan's not going to do that. Yeah. That's not happening one more time. But because of that, I came into the classroom knowing kind of instinctively, like I would just put myself in my kid's shoes or my child's self shoes. I'm like, what would I do here? And I punch holes in my own processes and then close those holes before I ever got to my kids. Right. So, and I would literally with middle school, I'd be like, okay, here's what we're going to do. And here's all the things you're not going to do. And here's what you're going to do. And I'd watch the kids, like their little eyes would like, oh, shoot. Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Darn.
No holes.
Right. No holes. I think it's great that we kind of call those things out, because those are often the things that for me, I felt challenged when I started supervising teachers was I didn't know how to call those things out. So I'm wondering, like you make that first leap as a principal, where you start supervising teachers. And that's a big learning curve around like, oh, how do I take this thing that I instinctively knew how to do? And we're definitely not trained in like principal school on how to like do anything, basically. A few compliance issues and that's it. And then you made that next leap from being a principal to supervising principals. And I'm just wondering what some of those challenges were for you, or those places where originally you felt stymied of like, I know instinctively how to do this, but I don't know how to teach someone else how to do this at a school level.
Well, the way I approached that was that I wanted to be the kind of supervisor that I wished I had and I did. I'm not saying I didn't. I had one in particular that did a really good job of really being supportive and listening and really just give me time and space to reflect and think about, what I did or why I did it and how I could do it better. So I did try to emulate that. But I also wanted to pay attention to the kind of the stuff that comes down from the top to principals and the stuff that comes from the bottom where principals just feel squeezed constantly and try to like, the way I used to do this as a principal for my teachers is I used to be like, okay, it's going to hit my back before it hits them. And as a principal supervisor, I still try to make sure that they're not getting hit by the stuff that is just going to get in the way of them doing a good job. I mean, I can't take care of what's coming from the bottom up. I can be there to support them when it happens, be a thought partner, help them think about procedures and systems and things that will maybe, if they're not there, we'll create more bottom up bubbling up. But my goal is to really try to hold the stuff back from them that I can, so that they can just do what they need to do every day and be their best selves. So that's how I approached it, and that's how I continue to approach it. In the chief academic officer role, sometimes I am the one who's putting the stuff down on them, so then that's a challenge where I'm like, wait, I'm trying to shield them. But I'm the one who's creating it. So that's kind of my new learning. Like, how do you create the policies and things that need to happen at a district level across all schools, but still give the principals the right support so that they can roll them out well. And how do you still hold, how do you still bring teacher voice into that? That's also kind of like, how do you create a more collaborative system so that when those initiatives are happening, people feel seen and heard and a part of it, as opposed to it's being done to me.
Yeah.
So that's the new learning for me. How do you do that at a wider systems level?
Yeah, balancing collaboration and engagement with urgency, which can feel really hard to know which two to toggle between. Yeah, that makes sense.
I kind of think about when you, and as an example, right? So the walkthrough tools you helped principals create, and the SPSA, and the support you gave with principals around. Yeah, I was actually gonna say it. Single plan. I actually know what it is. I see one of those osmosis things that I didn't know a few years ago, but now I actually know what that acronym is. Right, but every school has to have a single plan for student achievement, right?
Right.
And is that state or federal?
That's state.
It's state. So according to the state, so that's a policy that's been put on schools, and that could be something that people just like do as a compliance thing, where they just get it done and it doesn't live, and it's not a living document that really helps them guide their work as an institution. Or it could be something that is really a value of helping guide the work and the journey. And then when we think about walkthrough tools, which you help principals create around what am I looking for when I'm walking through and observing in classrooms, that are helping us then get to this goal. So that feels like one of those things that I watched you take something that was a mandate and make it live. And so what were some of the challenges of that, and how did you make that happen? Another good question, right? No.
You read my mind. It is a good question. And you said SPSA, which like warms me up, and because that's like my favorite is those tools. So thank you.
Yeah, so for me as a principal, and again, I always go back to how did I feel when I was a teacher? How did I feel when I was a principal? So for me as a principal, the only way I could feel good about crafting a document like this single plan for student achievement was to make sure that it was actually a guidance document and like a living, breathing roadmap for how we were going to do what we were going to do at the school site. So for me, the only way that worked is for me to look at, okay, what are the goals? How are we using our resources? And then how are we progress monitoring along the way to see that this is actually working? And so I, as a principal, would look at, okay, well, this is our goal around reading and literacy. Where am I seeing it happen on a daily basis, and are we making growth, not just in our looking at our data, but like is teacher practice rising up and getting better? So I would use it that way. I would go in and say, okay, this is our goal, this is what we said we were going to do, are the teachers doing what we said they were going to do? And if not, how am I supporting and coaching them, and then what professional development do I need to put in place? And then how does the instructional leadership team review this together and figure out what we're, how are we adjusting along the way? So ultimately, I said to myself, if I'm ever a principal supervisor, I'm going to help other principals do this, because it worked for me to organize. Going back to one of the first questions we had, like, how do you organize around urgency and well, at the end of the day, what's always going to be urgent is that our students are getting to a place where the doors start to open for them, the opportunities are starting to be there for them. And if you take your eyes off of that, then, and you're only focusing on, all the stuff that's bubbling up, you're never going to get there. So I always thought of the SPSA as the check, like, let's go back and look, are we doing this? Are we getting there? And how do we know? And I think the most authentic way to figure that out is actually going into the classrooms and seeing what the experience for kids is.
Yeah, well, what you're saying, I think is so important, and it's one of my personal things that I have an opinion about. I have many opinions, but that's
why we love
you. No opinions.
Some people.
That's why I love you.
But you've had these lived experiences. So what I was actually struck by, like, I loved all of what you said, but what was sitting with me as you were talking was you are constantly putting yourself back into the shoes of the
Yeah.
people that you're impacting.
Mm-hmm.
So you had enough lived experience and knowledge as a teacher to be able to kind of remember, even though it might have been a while ago, what a teacher's experience was, and you're back in classrooms still, so you're keeping it relevant. And then you can step into the shoes of like, when I was a principal, how would this land for me?
Mm-hmm.
And how can I then think about that as I'm in my new role now as a leader? And I think actually that is such an important part of what's often missing these days in the people that are bringing initiatives forward. Most, like 95% of the people at the state level that are creating the policies that we need to live with, the tests that we live with, the curriculum that we need to live with, have never actually been teachers. They haven't been in the classroom. Most professors of education haven't been teachers. I don't have stats on that, but it's pretty significant.
That's so
Most
crazy.
researchers,
It's so crazy.
many
It's
superintendents can completely bypass any of those steps and just step into the superintendent level and never ever been a teacher, never ever been a school leader.
Really?
Oh yeah, there's whole theories around this, right? So there's groups that are like, oh, you don't need teacher training, we'll just give you this like experience. You don't need administrator training, we're just going to give you this experience.
Oh my gosh.
You don't need school level training, we'll give you this experience. And you know, a lot of those, there's good that come out of those kinds of groups, but I think you cannot, I think it causes more harm often because you don't have the lived experience. And so folks in education are constantly re-injured all the time because people are coming in and asking them to do something that they know in their core isn't possible, but they don't have the voice and the agency to do it. And so it's just great that you know that, and you also give people the agency to raise that up and have the flexibility. I'm gonna step off my soapbox now, but I just want to name like it's a big deal for me in education, and I just think it's where a lot of the harm comes in.
Me too.
I'm gonna stop talking because we have time for one more question.
Oh my goodness.
You've been knocking it out of the park, so I'm gonna put you on the
now
spot.
I feel like I'm on the spot. I don't. So I guess is the moving forward piece and sort of thinking about where you are currently in your career and where you are in this position of chief academic officer, and what are your goals? What are you hoping to move forward? What are you hoping to learn? Where are you hoping to grow? And sort of think about the next
Another
steps.
great question. That was a really good last one. Susan, 5 stars today.
Yay! It's what happens when we come in on Sunday instead of a Friday, right? I have more bandwidth to be able to actually think things through.
So I'm new to the role of Chief Academic Officer this year, and my vision for what I'm doing in this role is to really work to create the conditions for the teachers to be as successful as they can possibly be in the classroom. And again, I think my way of doing that is by helping principals do the best job that they can do. And I think for me, what I want to see is that we are continuing to really figure out how do we create the best possible tier 1 instruction in classrooms so that we have fewer and fewer kids needing tier 2 and tier 3 supports. And for me, I need to also practice what I preach. So I need to give myself time and space to do the reflection and to really think, okay, I mean, obviously I'm going to make mistakes along the way, but if I can keep that vision of the reason why we're doing this is so that kids can be successful, so that we're opening up opportunities for all of our kids, then how are we creating the right conditions for teachers? Because being a teacher is super duper stressful, and teachers have so many competing demands on them in any given moment. And that is exactly the way it feels to be a principal. So knowing that, I'm trying to figure out in the role that I have, how do I give more support and give more time for folks to do what it is that they need to do in the classroom in the right way, which for me does feel like taking some of the technical demands off of their plate the best that I can, knowing that we're also beholden to, meeting certain proficiency requirements and things like that for kids. It's, it's a balance, I think. But that's my goal, is figure out how do you do it? How do you in a whole system shift there's still urgency, but how do you take the stress out of that urgency, and empower the people to do the work, to create that success for kids.
Awesome.
That was a perfect ending.
Yeah.
You know, you two are two of my favorite people in the whole world.
You two are my
Chris is always saying we give too much love here, but I don't think
I don't
so.
care. Forget you, Chris.
Love, love.
And I have so much respect for both of you and the work that you do, and I've been so grateful to be able to work in this work with you both, and to work under your leadership, and to work in partnership, and just to like truly see women in leadership that continue to hold students at the center of the work.
Yeah.
And both of you do that really, really well. So.
Oh, Susan, you're a little teary.
I am getting a little teary.
Yeah, I'm deeply grateful for your time too, Sarah, and for your leadership, and for women in leadership, because actually that gets smaller and smaller as you're the higher up you go. And just your heart-centered and your grounded stance, I think, is so powerful. And since you're the chief academic officer of my son's school district, I'm very grateful, because he needs that, you know. And I think you being able to see and understand students matters. So thank you so much. And what a fun show.
Yay, it was a great show.
Yay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.